Chapter 1. The Bet. The thing Ryan liked most about his life wasn't that it was exciting. It was that it wasn't. At 31, he had reached a point where peace felt like its own reward. His consulting business paid well. Better than well, really. Companies called when problems became expensive, and Ryan had built a reputation for solving problems without drama. That reputation kept him busy. He lived in a modest ranch house in a quiet neighborhood. During the day, the street was peaceful while he worked. Then around late afternoon, garage doors opened, kids rode bikes, and families drifted outside. It reminded him of growing up. That familiar rhythm made the holidays easier when homesickness crept in. And somehow, despite the business, the house, and everything else he'd built, the best part of his life was still Susan Carson. 3 years together had removed most of the uncertainty people talked about in relationships. They weren't figuring each other out anymore. They already had. They'd navigated boundaries, merged friend groups, had the difficult conversations, discussed finances, values, future plans, and what they wanted their lives to look like. The only thing left was time. Specifically 6 months of officially living together before getting married. At least that had been the plan. Ryan leaned against the wall of the pool hall and watched Susan laughing with her friends. She was beautiful. Not in the dramatic movie star way people always describe beauty. She was comfortable, warm, the kind of person who made every room feel more welcoming just by entering it. As if she sensed him looking, Susan glanced across the room. Their eyes met. She smiled. Ryan smiled back. A faint blush appeared on her cheeks. He chuckled. 3 years later, and she still blushed when he looked at her too long. Nearby, one of his friends nudged him. "You've got it bad." Ryan shrugged. "Sure do." His friend laughed. "No shame at all. Why would I be ashamed?" Fair point. Across the room, Susan's group had become animated. Several women were talking at once. Ryan caught words like venues, flowers, and engagement rings. He wasn't particularly interested in wedding colors. However, he was interested in the woman discussing them. One of Susan's friends noticed him watching. She pointed. The entire group turned toward him. Instantly, amused smiles appeared. Ryan sighed dramatically. "Oh, what did you do?" his friend asked. "Probably exists." That earned a round of laughter. Susan folded her arms. "You're being talked about." Ryan grinned. "Good things, I hope." No comment. The playful challenge in her eyes caused an idea to form. It arrived suddenly. Simple. Ridiculous. Perfect. Ryan pushed away from the wall. His friends immediately noticed. "What's that look?" "What look?" "The one that says you've decided something." Ryan smiled. "I have." Before anyone could stop him, he crossed the room. Susan's conversation paused. "Hi," she said. "Hi. Why are you smiling like that?" Ryan looked around at the gathered group. "I heard you talking." Several women immediately laughed. "That's dangerous." "I know." Susan narrowed her eyes slightly. "What are you up to?" Ryan pointed toward the nearest pool table. "I have a challenge." Now everyone was listening. Susan raised an eyebrow. "A challenge? If you beat me in a game of pool, I'll propose." Silence. Then absolute chaos. Cheers erupted. Someone nearly dropped a drink. His friends rushed over from the next table. "What did he just say? Did he actually say it?" "I think he actually said it." Susan stared at him. "Genuinely serious?" Ryan stepped closer. The room suddenly felt smaller, quieter. He leaned down so only she could hear. "Win or lose, you're mine." Then he gently kissed her cheek. When he pulled back, her eyes had filled with tears. Not sad tears. Happy ones. The kind that appeared when a person felt completely safe. Her radiant smile made his chest tighten. She composed herself a second later. Then her competitive side returned. "Oh, I'm absolutely holding you to that." The surrounding crowd cheered. "Witnesses. We all heard it. You can't back out now." Ryan laughed. "I wasn't planning to." They moved to an open table. People gathered around immediately. Apparently everyone enjoyed a little public chaos. Ryan picked up a cue stick. "Ladies first." Susan shook her head. "Fair is fair." She grabbed a coin. Heads and tails were called. The coin spun. Ryan won. A chorus of exaggerated boos followed. He bowed dramatically. "Thank you. Your support means everything." More laughter. The balls were racked. Ryan accepted the cue ball. He looked up. Susan was watching him. Not the table. Not the crowd. Just him. For a second, the noise disappeared. "Ready?" he asked. She smiled softly. "Always." Ryan chalked the cue deliberately, taking his time. From the outside, he appeared intensely focused. Internally, he was trying not to laugh. The cue ball was placed carefully. The room grew quiet. People leaned closer. Ryan lined up the shot, looked at Susan, winked, then gently tapped the cue ball directly into the back pocket without touching a single other ball. The ball disappeared. Everyone gasped. "What? No way. He missed on purpose." Ryan straightened, smiling. "I guess I lost." The crowd exploded. Susan covered her mouth. Ryan reached into his pocket. The ring box was already there. He had been carrying it for weeks. promise was a promise. But before he could pull it out, wait, everything stopped. Ryan froze. The crowd froze. Susan grinned. You lost. I did. You promised to marry me. I did. I haven't promised you anything yet. The silence became immediate and absolute. Several people looked genuinely concerned. Ryan stared. Susan folded her arms, still smiling. If we're spending the rest of our lives together, I need to know something. Oh, you can still surprise me. A few nervous laughs escaped the audience. Susan continued. If you surprise me, I promise I'll marry you. The room waited, expecting confusion, maybe panic, possibly an argument. Instead, Ryan's head tipped back and he laughed. A real laugh, the kind that couldn't be faked. Within seconds, everyone else joined him. Susan pointed triumphantly. See? That wasn't the reaction they expected. Nope. Ryan gave her a mock salute. Challenge accepted. The cheering returned immediately. The crowd relaxed. Conversations resumed. The evening rolled onward. But as Ryan settled back into his chair beside Susan later that night, he couldn't stop smiling. Because unlike everyone else in the room, he already knew exactly how he was going to win. And Susan didn't have the slightest clue. Chapter 2, Operation Surprise. Ryan Jackson had successfully proposed without actually proposing. As far as he was concerned, that was impressive. As far as Susan was concerned, it was hilarious. For the next week, she reminded him of that fact every chance she got. The first reminder came the very next morning. Ryan was making coffee when he heard her voice from the kitchen table. Good morning. He glanced over. Susan was trying, and failing, not to smile. Morning. You lose any major life-altering bets recently? Ryan sighed. There it is. She grinned. There it is. He handed her a mug. You know most people would have accepted the ring. Most people are boring. Ryan nodded. Fair. She took a sip. I can't believe you intentionally scratched on the brake. I was committing to the bit. You launched the cue ball directly into a pocket. I wanted everyone to understand what was happening. Susan laughed. Trust me, they understood. Ryan leaned against the counter. You know, normal couples don't turn engagements into competitive sporting events. You love that I did. I absolutely do. Her smile softened. I know. That was part of why things worked between them. Nobody was trying to win. Nobody was testing each other. There wasn't some hidden scorecard. Life was already complicated enough. Being together wasn't. Which was why her challenge hadn't bothered him in the slightest. It was playful. And honestly, she'd accidentally made his plan even better. Because now surprising her wasn't just an idea. It was a mission. And Ryan loved solving problems. Monday morning found him sitting in his home office. The consulting side of his business was busy enough that most people assumed he worked 60-hour weeks. The reality was simpler. Ryan worked hard when clients needed him. The rest of the time, he valued efficiency. At 10 o'clock, he finished fixing a database issue for a manufacturing company. At 10:15, he received a wire payment that would have paid some people's monthly rent. At 10:16, he opened a browser tab labeled, Golden Retriever Puppies Near Me. He stared at the search results. A grin slowly appeared. I am absolutely doing this. The office door opened. Susan stepped inside carrying her laptop. Ryan quickly minimized the page. She narrowed her eyes. Why did you do that? Do what? You just hid something. No, I didn't. You absolutely did. Ryan put on his most innocent expression. Susan laughed immediately. That's your lying face. I don't have a lying face. You do. I don't. You look exactly like a 6-year-old who got caught stealing cookies. Ryan pointed. Objection. Speculation. She sat at the second desk they had recently added to the office. The desk looked natural there. Like it had always belonged. Like she had always belonged. That thought made Ryan smile. Susan pointed again. There. You're smiling suspiciously. I smile all the time. You usually tell me why. Nope. Her eyes widened. Oh my God. What? You actually have a surprise. Ryan said nothing. She dramatically stood. Oh, this is exciting. He laughed. Sit down. No. Susan. No. I'm investigating. You watch too many detective shows. That's exactly what someone hiding evidence would say. 5 minutes later, she had accomplished absolutely nothing. The only information she'd extracted was that Ryan was amused, which somehow irritated and delighted her at the same time. By Wednesday, their friends had become involved. That proved to be a mistake. Friends were wonderful. Friends were supportive. Friends were also professional instigators. Ryan arrived at a local restaurant that evening and was immediately greeted by Chris. Chris didn't even say hello. What are you planning? Ryan sat down. Good to see you too. What are you planning? Nothing. Liar. Across the table, Susan pointed triumphantly. See? Everybody knows he's hiding something. Chris nodded. We've discussed it. Ryan looked around. You've discussed it? Several heads nodded. There were 6 people at the table. Every single one looked invested. Ryan stared. The group stared back. Felt like a hostage negotiation. Finally he sighed. I run a consulting business. Okay. I solve technical problems. Okay. You people have somehow become a technical problem. The table erupted into laughter. Susan nearly spilled her drink. Chris pointed. Deflection. Ryan pointed back. Conspiracy. Another friend leaned forward. We have theories. Oh no. We do. Susan brightened. We do. Chris pulled out his phone. Ryan immediately groaned. There shouldn't be a slideshow. There is absolutely a slideshow. There is a slideshow? There are charts. Ryan rubbed his forehead. This is why nobody tells you people's secrets. The first slide appeared. The surprise theory list. Susan laughed so hard she snorted. Ryan looked horrified. Chris began reading. Theory 1. Ryan secretly purchased a private island. No. Theory 2. Ryan intends to hire a mariachi band. No. Theory 3. Ryan bought a horse. Susan wiped tears from her eyes. A horse? I don't know. Chris defended. You said surprise. Ryan laughed. You jumped directly from island to horse. There was a flowchart. Of course there was. The theories somehow became worse. A hot air balloon. A helicopter. A flash mob. Petting zoo. Ryan denied everyone. Susan became increasingly entertained. Finally she sat back. Okay. These are terrible. Thank you, Ryan said. She pointed at him. But your face changed on the petting zoo. Ryan froze. The table collectively gasped. Chris yelled. Her lock is broken. Ryan burst out laughing. His composure lasted approximately 4 seconds, which unfortunately gave Susan confidence. You have something alive. Ryan immediately stopped laughing. Susan's eyes widened. The table went silent. Everyone stared at him. Ryan maintained a neutral expression. Years of consulting meetings finally paid off. No comment. Susan slammed both hands on the table. It's alive. Everyone exploded. Ryan just smiled and took a bite of his burger. 2 days later Susan remained completely certain she had solved the mystery. Unfortunately, she had solved the wrong mystery. Friday evening she arrived at Ryan's house carrying groceries. The moment she walked through the door she called out, I know about the rabbit. Ryan looked up from the couch. The what? The rabbit. There is no rabbit. She froze. There isn't. No. Susan frowned. Ha. Ryan waited. She continued standing there. Finally he asked, would you like to explain where rabbit came from? I had a theory. You had a theory. It was a very good theory. Ryan laughed. No, it wasn't. It was for almost 3 hours. That answer somehow made perfect sense. The next morning Ryan finally completed his plan. The breeder called. Everything was ready. He hung up the phone and sat quietly in his office. For a moment he pictured Susan's reaction. The excitement. The laughter. The way she'd immediately pick the puppy up and refuse to put her down. His smile grew. Then his phone buzzed. A text from Susan. Have you surprised me yet? Ryan typed back. No. 3 dots appeared immediately. Are you going to? Yes. When? That would ruin the surprise. A pause. Then, fair. Love you. Ryan looked at the message and smiled. Love you too. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. The barbecue was only a few days away. The puppy was ready. The name was ready. The surprise was ready. And Ryan couldn't wait to discover which would shock Susan more. The tiny golden retriever she had always wanted. Or the fact that he intended to introduce her as Princess Susan. Chapter 3 Princess Susan arrives. Ryan had exactly 3 problems. The first problem was hiding a puppy. The second problem was hiding a puppy from Susan. The third problem was hiding a puppy from Susan, while their friend group collectively possessed the subtlety of a marching band. The puppy itself wasn't helping. She was 8 weeks old, fluffy, golden, adorable, and apparently incapable of remaining quiet for more than 6 consecutive minutes. Ryan looked down at the tiny dog currently chewing on his shoelace. You are going to ruin everything. The puppy wagged her tail. Ryan sighed. Not exactly a remorseful reaction. The tail wagged harder. Unfortunately, Ryan was already attached, which was dangerous considering he'd only picked her up that morning. She looked up at him. Ryan looked away immediately. No. The puppy tilted her head. No emotional manipulation. Tiny bark. Ryan pointed. That's exactly what I'm talking about. The barbecue was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. The puppy arrived Thursday. Those 48 hours felt like 48 years. Ryan worked from home, which usually made life easier. Today it meant he had a tiny golden retriever following him everywhere. Everywhere. Bathroom, waiting outside, kitchen, at his feet, office, curled beside his chair. By Friday afternoon she had become convinced they were inseparable. Ryan's phone rang. Client. He answered. Hey Mike. A cheerful bark immediately followed. There was a pause. What was that? Mike asked. Ryan closed his eyes. A dog. You got a dog? No. A bark. Another bark. Then several enthusiastic barks. Mike laughed. Sounds like the dog disagrees. Ryan stared at the puppy. The puppy stared back. The betrayal was immediate. The bigger challenge arrived that evening when Susan called. Ryan answered on speaker while making dinner. Hi. Hi. What's for dinner? Chicken. Exciting. It isn't. She laughed. Ryan smiled automatically. Life with Susan involved a lot of conversations that went nowhere in particular. That was one of his favorite things about it. There didn't always need to be a purpose. They simply liked talking to each other. Unfortunately, the puppy chose that exact moment to bark. Ryan froze. Susan froze. There was silence. Then, Ryan. Yes. What was that? He glanced at the puppy. The puppy looked delighted. I don't know. Susan laughed immediately. That was the worst lie you've ever told. I've told worse. No. Probably not. The puppy barked again. Susan gasped. Oh my God. Ryan rubbed his forehead. No. It's a puppy. No. It's absolutely a puppy. No. Ryan. No comment. There was a very long pause. Then Susan groaned dramatically. It's a puppy. Ryan smiled. Maybe. It's a puppy. No proof. I hate you. You love me. I do love you. Ryan laughed. So we're good. No. You still love me though? Sigh. Unfortunately. Saturday finally arrived. Ryan woke to a warm little body sleeping against his leg. The puppy stretched, yawned, rolled over, then immediately fell off the couch. Ryan winced. The puppy stood up, apparently unharmed. Graceful. She sneezed. Fair enough. By noon the backyard was ready. The grill was heating up. Tables were set. Friends were arriving. Ryan was moving food around the patio when Chris appeared. Chris looked around suspiciously, then immediately asked, Where's the dog? Ryan froze. Which dog? The dog. There is no dog. Chris rolled his eyes. Ryan. What? You accidentally left fur on your shirt. Ryan looked down. Sure enough. Golden fur. Several strands. Chris pointed triumphantly. Evidence. Ryan sighed. You'd make a terrible detective. I found the clue. You found a shirt. Before Chris could reply, several more friends arrived. Then more. Then more. The backyard rapidly filled with laughter and conversation. Ryan checked his watch. Susan should be arriving any minute. His stomach suddenly tightened. Not nerves. Excitement. He couldn't remember being this excited about anything in years. A car door slammed. Ryan looked up. Susan was here. She stepped through the gate carrying a bowl of potato salad. The moment she spotted him, she smiled. There it was. His favorite smile. The one reserved just for him. Not dramatic. Not flashy. Just warm. Comfortable. Home. She walked over. Hi. Hi. She kissed his cheek. Everybody's been asking weird questions. Ryan nodded. That sounds like our friends. They're terrible. They are. Susan narrowed her eyes. You're suspiciously calm. Maybe I'm naturally calm. No. You're hiding something. Ryan laughed. Possibly. Definitely. Before he could answer, Chris appeared. Practically vibrating. Can we do it now? Susan looked confused. Do what now? Chris pointed at Ryan. The thing. Ryan immediately regretted inviting any of these people. Susan blinked. What thing? Chris slapped a hand over his mouth. Everyone nearby groaned. Ryan buried his face in his hands. Oh, you idiot. MMPH. Take your hand off your mouth. Chris did. Sorry. Susan pointed. See? There is a thing. There might be. There is a thing. Ryan sighed dramatically. Fine. Everybody became quiet. 30 people suddenly paying attention wasn't subtle. Susan looked around. What is happening? Ryan smiled. You challenged me. Her eyes widened slightly. Oh, I accepted. The crowd gathered closer. Susan folded her arms. You have my attention. Ryan nodded toward the house. Wait right here. Then he walked inside. The room buzzed immediately. Susan looked between her friends. What is going on? Nobody answered. Mostly because they wanted to see her reaction. Ryan disappeared for less than a minute. Then returned. Holding something. At first Susan couldn't see what it was. Then the tiny golden head lifted. Susan froze. Absolutely froze. The entire world seemed to stop moving. Ryan watched her expression. Confusion. Recognition. Shock. Then joy. Pure joy. Oh, that was all she managed. Just one tiny word. Oh. Ryan crossed the yard. The puppy looked around happily. Susan's eyes immediately filled with tears. Oh my God. The puppy wiggled excitedly. Susan covered her mouth. No. Ryan grinned. Yes. No. Yes. Oh my God. The puppy stretched toward her. That was all it took. Susan practically lunged forward. Ryan carefully handed over the tiny dog. The second the puppy reached her arms, Susan melted. Absolutely melted. The puppy's tail became a blur. Susan laughed through happy tears. The puppy immediately licked her nose. The crowd collectively awed. Several phones appeared. Pictures were taken instantly. Susan looked up. You got me a puppy? Ryan nodded. You wanted a dog. Her voice cracked. You remembered. Ryan blinked. Of course I remembered. For a second her eyes softened. That look meant more to him than any grand speech ever could. Then she glanced back down. The puppy was now attempting to eat her hair. Susan laughed. Hi, sweetheart. The puppy barked. The crowd laughed. Chris pointed. Wait until she hears the name. Ryan groaned. Susan looked up. Oh no. Ryan smiled. Oh yes. Her eyes narrowed. What did you do? The grin on his face answered everything. Several friends immediately started laughing. Susan pointed accusingly. You named her something ridiculous. Maybe. Ryan. Possibly. Ryan. He finally surrendered. Her name is Princess Susan. The backyard exploded. People doubled over laughing. Chris nearly fell out of his chair. Someone actually snorted. Susan stared. The puppy stared. Ryan stood his ground. For approximately 3 seconds. Then he started laughing too. To his surprise, Susan wasn't offended. Instead she buried her face in the puppy's fur and laughed until she couldn't breathe. Oh my God. Ryan nodded. That's fair. You named my dog after me. Technically Princess Susan. The puppy barked. Susan looked at the dog. The dog looked back. Then Susan smiled. A huge smile. A delighted smile. The kind that made Ryan instantly know he'd won. She hugged the puppy tighter. The puppy's paws would barely touch the ground for the rest of the evening. And Susan never stopped smiling. Not once. Because Ryan had surprised her. Completely. And for the first time since the pool hall, she was beginning to wonder whether she had accidentally made her challenge too easy. Chapter 4: The Quiet Proposal. By the time the sun started setting, Ryan's backyard looked like the aftermath of a very successful invasion. Paper plates were scattered across tables. The grill was cooling. Someone had left a half-finished game of cornhole in the middle of the lawn. And Princess Susan had somehow become the most popular guest at the party. Ryan wasn't even surprised. The puppy had spent the afternoon being passed from person to person like a very furry celebrity. Every few minutes someone would exclaim, "It's my turn," or "Give me the puppy," or "She's smiling at me." At one point Chris had declared himself the puppy's favorite person. The puppy had immediately peed on his shoe. The entire party had voted that the matter was settled. Chris maintained it was an accident. Nobody agreed. Especially not Susan. "It's karma," she informed him. "For what?" Susan pointed at him. "For the slideshow. That was quality investigative work. That was 32 PowerPoint slides. It was 26. Ryan looked up from his chair. "The fact that either of you know that number is concerning." The puppy eventually returned to Susan's lap, which appeared to be where she preferred to be. Not that Susan was complaining. The dog had been in her arms so much that Ryan had started wondering if she'd remember she was supposed to drive home eventually. He walked over carrying 2 drinks. Susan looked up. "Hi. Hi." She accepted the glass. Princess Susan immediately attempted to investigate it. "No." The puppy ignored her. "No." The puppy continued. Susan looked at Ryan. "She's stubborn." Ryan nodded. "Wonder where she gets that." Susan gasped dramatically. "Rude. Accurate." She narrowed her eyes. "I haven't done anything stubborn all day." Ryan stared. Susan stared back. Ryan continued staring. She lasted 4 seconds. Then she burst out laughing. "Okay, maybe a little. Just a little? A moderate amount." Ryan accepted that answer. Mostly because the puppy was currently trying to climb onto his shoulder. As evening settled in, people slowly began leaving. The departures took forever. Nobody ever left their gatherings quickly. Every goodbye turned into another conversation, which became another joke, which became another 10 minutes. Ryan had learned long ago not to fight it. Eventually cars started pulling away. Friends waved. Promises to meet up next weekend were made. The backyard grew quieter, then quieter still, until finally only 3 occupants remained. Ryan, Susan, and a sleeping puppy. Susan sat curled against one end of the couch inside the living room. Princess Susan was sprawled across her lap. The puppy had reached that stage of exhaustion where she appeared completely powered down. One little paw twitched, then stopped. Susan smiled down at her. "She's perfect." Ryan sat beside her. "I thought you'd like her." She looked up. "Like her?" "Yeah." Susan laughed softly. "I love her." Ryan smiled. Mission accomplished. For several minutes neither of them spoke. The house was quiet. Comfortably quiet. The kind of silence that only exists between people who genuinely enjoy each other's company. No need to fill every moment. No pressure. Just contentment. Susan absent-mindedly stroked the puppy's ears. Ryan watched them both. The scene felt oddly complete. Like something he wanted to remember years from now. Not because it was dramatic. Because it wasn't. Felt real. That mattered more. Susan eventually noticed him looking. "What?" Ryan shrugged. "Nothing. That's a lie." "Okay." She smiled. "What?" Ryan thought about answering. Then changed his mind. Then changed it back. Then decided there wasn't any point overcomplicating things. So he told the truth. "I love this." Susan blinked. Love what? He gestured vaguely. This. She looked around. My dog. Our dog. Susan's smile widened immediately. Our dog. Ryan nodded. You. Another smile. The house. Yet another smile. The future. That one hit differently. The playful expression faded. Not completely. Just enough. Enough for sincerity to settle into the room. Susan looked down at the sleeping puppy. Then back at him. Ryan suddenly found himself strangely nervous. Not because he didn't know the answer. He knew. They both knew. That wasn't the point. The point was that some moments deserved respect. This was one of them. He reached into his pocket. Susan noticed immediately. Her eyes widened. Ryan laughed softly. You figured that out fast. You've had that look before. Oh, the pool hall. Ryan smiled. Fair. The ring box appeared. Small. Simple. Exactly like he'd always intended. The puppy remained asleep, completely unaware she was about to become part of a story that would probably be retold for decades. Ryan looked at Susan. Really looked at her. Not the beautiful woman everybody else saw. The woman he'd spent 3 years building a life with. The woman who respected him, understood him, challenged him, trusted him. The woman who had become home. He opened the box. No speech. No rehearsed lines. No audience. Just honesty. Susan. Her eyes immediately filled with tears. Ryan smiled. Will you marry me? For the first time in perhaps the entire history of their relationship, Susan appeared completely speechless. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Tear escaped. Then another. Ryan patiently waited. Finally she laughed through the tears. That was your plan? Ryan looked confused. The proposal? No. She gestured between them. All of it. His confusion only deepened. Susan shook her head. You cheated. I did not. You got me a puppy first. Ryan considered that. Strategic timing isn't cheating. It absolutely is. Prove it. She laughed so hard she had to wipe her eyes. Ryan waited. Patiently. Comfortably. Because he already knew. Eventually Susan looked straight at him. The laughter softened. Everything else faded away. Yes. Ryan's heartbeat immediately settled. Not sped up. Settled. Like something falling naturally into place. Susan smiled. Yes, I'll marry you. Ryan slipped the ring onto her finger. Perfect fit. She stared at it briefly. Then at him. Then she leaned forward and kissed him. Soft. Warm. Certain. The kind of kiss that said everything words couldn't. When they finally pulled apart, Susan rested her forehead against his. We're getting married. We are. She laughed. We really are. Ryan smiled. Looks like it. The puppy suddenly woke up. Yawned. Looked around. And immediately climbed into both their laps. Susan burst out laughing. Ryan wasn't far behind. Because somehow it felt appropriate. Their engagement had involved a pool bet. A challenge. A puppy named Princess Susan. And now their newest family member had inserted herself directly into the middle of the moment. Exactly where she intended to stay. And neither of them would have changed a thing. Chapter 5 Family Opinions. Ryan learned something important 3 days after getting engaged. Getting engaged was easy. Telling family was easy. Surviving everybody's opinions afterward was the difficult part. It started on Tuesday. By Wednesday, Ryan was considering witness protection. Not because anyone was being difficult. Quite the opposite. Everyone was excited. The problem was that excitement apparently came with suggestions. Lots of suggestions. An endless avalanche of suggestions. Ryan was sitting in his office finishing a client call when his phone buzzed. Then buzzed again. And again. Finally the call ended. Ryan looked down. Family group chat. 18 new messages. He sighed. That's probably not good. He opened it. His mother had sent photos of wedding venues. An aunt had suggested flowers. A cousin had suggested a DJ. Another cousin had suggested not hiring that DJ because apparently there was a long story attached. Ryan closed the chat. Immediately reopened it. Then closed it again. Absolutely not. His phone rang. Mom. Ryan laughed. Of course. He answered. Hi, Mom. Did you see the pictures? I saw pictures. You didn't answer. It was 15 minutes ago. That's enough time. Ryan leaned back in his chair. Mom. Yes. We haven't even picked a date. Exactly. You should get started. Ryan rubbed his forehead. Have you considered that Susan and I might want to make some decisions ourselves? A pause. Then, of course. Another pause. Then, I just thought you'd want options. Ryan smiled. There it is. What? The real answer. His mother laughed. Fine. Maybe I'm excited. You think. I like Susan. So do I. I know. A warm silence followed. Then she spoke again. You picked well. The simple sincerity of it made Ryan smile. Thank you. That evening Susan arrived carrying takeout. Emergency food delivery. Ryan opened the door. Thank goodness. Rough day. He stepped aside to let her in. My family has become a wedding planning committee. Susan started laughing before she reached the kitchen. Mine too. Ryan froze. Already. Already. She set the bags down. My mother asked if we'd chosen centerpieces. We got engaged 3 days ago. I know. My aunt is arguing with another aunt over flowers. Susan blinked. Which flowers? I have no idea. That's honestly impressive. Ryan pointed at her. See? This is exactly why I agree to disagree with people. Because flower arguments terrify me. She laughed so hard she nearly dropped a container of fries. Dinner quickly turned into comparing family stories. Susan sat cross-legged on one side of the couch. Ryan occupied the other. Princess Susan occupied the middle. At least initially. The puppy eventually claimed 60% of the couch despite weighing less than 10 pounds. Nobody understood how she kept accomplishing that. Okay, Susan said. My turn. Ryan nodded. Hit me. My sister wants a chocolate fountain. A wedding chocolate fountain? Yes. Ryan blinked. Why? Nobody knows. My God. What? We're losing control. Susan pointed dramatically. We never had control. Ryan considered that. Fair. Princess Susan rolled onto her back. Ryan automatically reached down to scratch her stomach. The puppy let out a content sigh. Susan smiled. She's so spoiled. Ryan looked offended. No. The puppy was currently receiving belly rubs with both hands. Susan stared. Ryan stared back. Then he slowly looked down. Okay, maybe a little. A little? Moderately. You're impossible. I'm consistent. Saturday brought the first official gathering of both families. The meeting happened at Ryan's house. Neutral territory. At least that was the theory. The reality turned into organized chaos almost immediately. Susan's parents arrived first. Ryan liked them. They were practical people. Friendly. Easygoing. The kind of people who listened before speaking. A trait Ryan appreciated. Then his parents arrived. Then siblings. Then cousins. Then additional relatives Ryan wasn't entirely sure had been invited. At one point he spotted a great aunt examining his garden. He still wasn't completely sure how she'd found the address. Susan quietly appeared beside him. How many people are here? Ryan looked around. I stopped counting. Good. Why? She pointed. Princess Susan had escaped. Again. The puppy was sprinting through the backyard with 3 children chasing her. Not the other way around. The puppy was leading. The children were attempting to keep up. They've formed a gang, Susan said. Ryan nodded. They absolutely have. Inside, wedding discussions were underway. Surprisingly, they weren't terrible. Mostly because Ryan and Susan had established one rule. The final decisions belonged to them. Everyone else's opinions were welcome, not binding. It turned out adults handled that arrangement remarkably well. Mostly. An aunt pointed toward a magazine. What about this cake? Susan smiled politely. It looks nice. Another relative immediately disagreed. I don't like that frosting. A third relative joined in. I actually agree. Ryan quietly reached for his drink. He had absolutely no intention of entering the frosting debate. Susan noticed. Her eyes narrowed. You are escaping. I'm surviving. Traitor. Ryan smiled. You said opinions were welcome. That isn't what I said. Close enough. She laughed despite herself. Later in the afternoon, the conversation shifted. Less wedding planning. More stories. That was where things became dangerous. Parents loved telling stories, especially embarrassing stories. Ryan should have seen it coming. He didn't. His mother smiled. The smile alone was enough to worry him. Susan immediately noticed. Oh no. Ryan pointed. Exactly. His mother ignored him. When Ryan was 11. No. He got stuck. Mom. Trying to rescue a cat. Susan was already laughing. Ryan groaned. The story continued. Apparently his childhood attempt at heroism had ended with a ladder, a fence, a very annoyed cat, and local firefighters. By the end of it, the entire room was laughing. Even Ryan. Eventually, Susan wiped tears from her eyes. I wish I had known this years ago. I was hoping to take it to my grave. Not anymore. His mother looked delighted. Mission accomplished. As evening settled in, people began heading home. Goodbyes took almost as long as the gathering itself. Hugs were exchanged. Plans were made. Promises to stay in touch were repeated despite everyone already staying in touch constantly. Eventually the house became quiet again. Ryan closed the front door, exhaled, and leaned against it. Susan looked over from the couch. Done. Done. Princess Susan was asleep on her lap. Again, the puppy had established this as her preferred location. Ryan sat beside them. For a few moments neither spoke. Then Susan smiled. What? Ryan asked. She leaned over and kissed his cheek. Today was nice. Ryan nodded. It was. A little chaotic. A lot chaotic. Fair. They sat watching the sleeping puppy. The house felt warm. Lived in. Occupied by the future they had spent years building. Not perfect. Just right. And for Ryan, that had always been better than perfect. Because perfect was fragile. This was real. And real was exactly what he wanted. Chapter 6, The Puppy Problem. There came a point in every dog's life when they discovered they possessed free will. For Princess Susan, that point arrived approximately 2 weeks after Ryan and Susan got engaged. The timing was unfortunate, because wedding planning was accelerating. And the puppy had decided obedience was more of a guideline than a rule. The first incident happened on a Tuesday. Susan was sitting at the kitchen table reviewing venue paperwork. Ryan was working nearby with his laptop. Everything was peaceful, quiet, productive, for almost 6 minutes. Then Susan frowned. Ryan. Where's my pen? Ryan looked up. The one you were just using? Yes. No idea. Susan glanced around. The pen wasn't on the table, or the chair, or the floor. A moment later they heard a familiar sound from the living room. Crunch. Both froze. Ryan slowly stood. Oh no. Susan followed. Oh yes. They walked into the living room together. Princess Susan was proudly lying in the middle of the rug. The missing pen was between her paws. Well, most of it. The remaining pieces were spread across a 3-foot radius. The puppy wagged her tail. Ryan folded his arms. You know, I feel like we've discussed this. The tail wagged harder. Susan laughed. She's not sorry. Not remotely. The puppy grabbed another piece. Ryan immediately lunged forward. Nope. 3 days later things escalated. Their bakery appointment was going surprisingly well. The owner had arranged samples across a table. Chocolate, vanilla, red velvet, lemon. Susan was fully invested. Ryan was mostly there to support her and eat free cake. Felt like a good arrangement. The owner smiled. And this is one of our most popular frostings. Susan took a bite. Her eyes widened. Oh, that's amazing. Ryan accepted his sample. Yeah, that's dangerous. The owner laughed. I hear that a lot. Everything was going wonderfully. Then Ryan's phone buzzed. He glanced down. The screen displayed. Chris. Ryan answered. What's up? You need to come home. Ryan blinked. Why? A pause. How attached are you to your sofa cushions? Ryan immediately stood. Apparently Chris had stopped by to drop something off. Apparently Ryan had forgotten to lock the backyard gate. Apparently Princess Susan had noticed. The resulting chain of events was impressive. By the time Ryan arrived home, the puppy had relocated 3 cushions, 1 throw blanket, and approximately half a tennis ball. Chris was standing in the yard, holding what remained of the tennis ball. You owe me. For what? I got attached to this little monster. The puppy barked happily. Chris pointed. See? Ryan nodded. That's fair. Susan arrived a few minutes later. The moment she spotted the puppy, she crouched down. Who caused trouble? The puppy immediately ran toward her. Ryan looked betrayed. Oh, that's convenient. Susan scooped her up. She would never. Ryan stared at the destruction. Then at Susan. Then back at the destruction. Susan. Yes. The evidence is behind you. She looked. The room looked like a very specific hurricane had passed through. Susan considered the scene. Then looked at the puppy. Then at Ryan. Okay. Maybe a little. The next week brought family visits. Unfortunately, Princess Susan had discovered another talent. Stealing attention. Ryan's sister arrived carrying wedding magazines. The moment she stepped through the door, the puppy sprinted to greet her. Within 30 seconds, nobody was discussing weddings anymore. Everyone was discussing the puppy. Within 10 minutes, the puppy was sitting on Ryan's sister's lap. Within 15 minutes, wedding planning had completely collapsed. Susan shook her head. It's happening again. Ryan looked up from the couch. What is? The puppy is derailing an entire conversation. Ryan watched his sister baby talk the dog. Then watched his mother join in. Then watched his father start taking photos. He shrugged. I think we've lost them. Susan laughed. We definitely lost them. Their friends were no better. The group met for dinner one Friday evening. Princess Susan wasn't even there. That didn't matter. Chris somehow had 73 photos of the dog on his phone. Ryan counted. Actually counted. 73. Why do you have so many? Chris looked confused. Why don't you? Ryan considered that. Then checked his own phone. There were 147. Susan started laughing immediately. Oh my God. Ryan looked down. Huh. Chris pointed triumphantly. See? Ryan sighed. I've become one of those people. You absolutely have. A few days later, wedding invitations arrived. Boxes upon boxes of them. The timing should have been simple. Open boxes. Sort invitations. Address envelopes. Easy. Instead, Princess Susan chose violence. Ryan set a stack of invitations on the dining table. Turned around. Turned back. The stack was gone. Completely gone. He froze. Susan froze. Neither spoke. Then the puppy trotted proudly through the room carrying an invitation in her mouth. A trail of envelopes followed behind her. Ryan closed his eyes. No. Susan burst out laughing. The puppy ran faster. Ryan followed. No. Faster. No. Even faster. Come back here. The puppy considered this request and determined the exact opposite response would be more entertaining. Several minutes later, Ryan finally recovered the invitations. Most of them. A few had become slightly wrinkled. One had become significantly wrinkled. Ryan sat on the floor. Exhausted. The puppy immediately climbed into his lap. Susan dropped into the chair nearby. Still laughing. Ryan pointed at the dog. Your daughter is a criminal. Our daughter. Don't correct me during my suffering. Susan wiped tears from her eyes. She's lucky she's cute. The puppy licked Ryan's chin. Ryan held out for almost 2 seconds. Then he started petting her. Susan pointed. There it is. What? You folded. I did not. The puppy rolled over for a belly rub. Ryan automatically complied. Susan laughed harder. That was immediate. Ryan looked down at the dog, then shook his head. She's weaponized adorable. That evening the three of them settled onto the couch. The invitations were finally organized. The guest list was complete. The venue was booked. For the first time in weeks, there wasn't an urgent wedding task demanding their attention. Princess Susan was asleep between them. Again. At this point, neither Ryan nor Susan could remember how the dog kept ending up there. Ryan suspected she simply appeared whenever a couch existed. Susan rested her head against his shoulder. You know. What? This has been fun. Ryan looked at her. The wedding planning? Mostly. She smiled. The chaos. Ryan laughed. There has been a lot of chaos. There has. The puppy let out a tiny sleepy sigh. Both immediately looked down, then smiled. Because despite the chewed pens, the stolen invitations, the destroyed tennis balls, and the general insanity, neither of them would trade any of it. Not for anything. Especially not the little troublemaker sleeping peacefully between them. Chapter 7 Countdown to I Do. 3 weeks before the wedding, Ryan discovered there was a hidden law of the universe. The closer an event got, the faster time moved. Logically, that made no sense. Practically, it was absolutely true. One moment he and Susan had been discussing possible wedding dates. The next moment there were less than 25 days remaining, and people kept asking questions that started with the phrase, "Have you remembered to?" The answer was usually no. Ryan was working one afternoon when his phone buzzed. Then buzzed again. Then again. He finally glanced down. 6 messages. All from Susan. Ryan smiled. Experience told him she was either excited or witnessing a disaster. There was rarely a middle ground. He opened the chat. Emergency. Ryan immediately replied. What happened? 3 dots appeared. False alarm. Susan. I found the missing seating chart. Ryan stared. That isn't an emergency. Felt like one. He laughed. Where was it? Princess Susan stole it. Ryan wasn't even surprised. Of course she did. A second later another message arrived. I found 3 socks too. Ryan frowned. I was looking for those. That evening Susan arrived carrying a folder. The folder was thick. Suspiciously thick. Ryan pointed. What is that? She dropped it onto the coffee table. It contains our wedding. Ryan looked concerned. Our wedding fits in that folder? No. She sat beside him. That's just the paperwork. Ryan stared at the folder. Then at her. Then back at the folder. How many trees died for this marriage? Susan laughed. A significant number. Princess Susan immediately climbed onto the couch to investigate. Ryan reached for the folder. The puppy reached for the folder. Their eyes met. No. The puppy pawed at it. No. Another paw. You're not qualified. Susan laughed. She's trying her best. Her best includes crimes. The puppy looked offended. Or possibly sleepy. With puppies, it was sometimes difficult to tell. The next Saturday brought the final meeting with their wedding planner. The woman had somehow managed to organize months' worth of opinions without losing her sanity. Ryan considered that genuinely impressive. The planner smiled. So, how are we feeling? Susan answered immediately. Excited. Ryan nodded. Excited. The planner looked relieved. Good. That's significantly better than terrified. We have time for that later, Ryan said. Susan elbowed him. The planner laughed. Then she opened a notebook. Ryan regretted the joke immediately. There were many notes, so many notes. It looked less like a wedding plan and more like preparations for a moon landing. Halfway through the meeting, the planner turned toward them. One last question. Susan nodded. Okay. The ring bearer. Ryan smiled. The planner smiled back. Susan froze. Oh no. The planner looked confused. Ryan wasn't. Because they both knew exactly what was happening. Susan pointed. You've been thinking about this. A little. A little? A moderate amount. You stole my phrase. Ryan looked pleased with himself. The planner glanced back and forth. What am I missing? Ryan answered. We have a dog. Understanding immediately appeared. The planner laughed. Oh, Susan groaned. Oh no. The discussion lasted 20 minutes. Mostly because everyone agreed Princess Susan would be adorable. The challenge was ensuring she actually reached the end of the aisle. Ryan had concerns. reasonable concerns. The dog possessed enthusiasm. She lacked focus. If someone dropped a cracker halfway through the ceremony, the wedding could immediately become secondary. Susan finally leaned back in her chair. We're still doing it. Ryan nodded. We're absolutely doing it. The planner smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. The final weeks became a blur. Friends visited. Family called. Schedules filled. Tasks disappeared from lists only to be replaced by entirely new tasks. Yet somehow, neither Ryan nor Susan felt stressed. Busy, yes. Tired occasionally. But not stressed. Because every time something went wrong, they handled it together. A missing vendor confirmation? Solved. Incorrect table count? Solved. A cousin accidentally booking a hotel 3 hours away? Also solved, though it required considerably more explanation. One evening, after yet another successful problem-solving session, Susan looked across the dining table. You know what's funny? Ryan glanced up. What? We haven't had a single argument. He considered it. She was right. Not one. There had been disagreements, preferences, different opinions, but never a fight. Ryan shrugged. Why would we? Susan smiled. That's basically your life philosophy. It works. It does. Ryan pointed at her. You know why it works? Why? We're on the same team. The smile that followed was worth every second of wedding planning. A week before the wedding, their friend group gathered for one final relaxed evening. No planning. No responsibilities. Just food and conversation. Naturally, the wedding became the main topic anyway. Chris raised a glass. I have a question. Ryan became immediately suspicious. Why? Because. That's not an answer. It's all I have. The group laughed. Chris pointed dramatically. Which of you is crying first? Susan answered instantly. Ryan. Ryan looked offended. What? She grinned. You cry during dog videos. Those dogs got adopted. Exactly. They deserved happiness. The entire table erupted. Ryan accepted defeat. Okay. Fair. Chris nodded. Ryan's crying first. Several people agreed. Susan looked delighted. Ryan had no defense. Mostly because she was probably right. The night before the wedding arrived faster than either of them expected. Their house had finally grown quiet. Most preparations were finished. Most visitors had gone home. Princess Susan was asleep on the living room rug. For once, she wasn't causing trouble. Ryan and Susan sat together on the couch. The familiar spot. Their spot. Susan rested against his shoulder. Tomorrow. Ryan smiled. Tomorrow. The word hung comfortably between them. Neither felt nervous. Not really. The future wasn't an unknown thing looming in front of them. They'd already spent years building it. Tomorrow was simply making it official. Susan reached for his hand. Ryan squeezed it gently. You ready? She asked. He looked around the room. At the woman he loved. At the sleeping puppy. At the home they'd already begun sharing. Then back at Susan. More than ready. Always. Susan smiled. The same smile she'd worn at the pool table weeks ago. The same answer she'd given then. And somehow it felt exactly right. Tomorrow would be the wedding. But tonight, everything already felt complete. Chapter 8, The Wedding. Ryan Jackson did, in fact, cry first. Not dramatically. Not in a movie-worthy way. Just enough that Chris immediately collected $20 from 3 different people. Pay up. The defeated friends groaned. Ryan wasn't even through the venue doors yet. You people were betting on me? Chris pocketed the money. You cry during dog commercials. They reunited after 4 years. They were dogs. They had feelings. Chris looked toward the ceiling. See? This is exactly what I'm talking about. The groomsmen laughed. Ryan accepted his fate. There was no point arguing. Especially because he was probably about to cry again. The venue buzzed with activity. Family members moved between rooms. Friends checked decorations. Someone was looking for flowers. Someone else was looking for a missing cousin. The cousin was eventually found. He'd gotten distracted by breakfast. Ryan considered that a respectable excuse. Meanwhile, Princess Susan was receiving more attention than any member of the wedding party. The puppy had her own tiny floral collar. Everyone agreed she looked adorable. The puppy agreed too. She was currently accepting compliments as her natural right. Ryan crouched beside her. You understand this day isn't about you, right? Princess Susan licked his nose. Chris immediately appeared. She doesn't understand. No. She thinks she organized this. Probably. The puppy wagged proudly. Neither man had evidence to dispute the claim. As the ceremony approached, Ryan found himself standing alone for a few moments. The noise around him faded. Not literally. Just enough. Enough to think. He remembered the pool hall. The challenge. The deliberate missed shot. The backyard barbecue. The puppy. The proposal. Everything that had happened since. The funny thing was none of it felt very long ago. And yet it also felt like he'd been building toward this for years. Not the wedding itself. The marriage. That part mattered. Ryan wasn't standing there because he had found someone perfect. Neither of them was perfect. He was standing there because he'd found someone real. someone kind, someone who chose him every day, someone he happily chose in return. A knock interrupted his thoughts. His father stepped into the room. You ready? Ryan smiled. Yeah. His father nodded. No lengthy speech. No dramatic moment. Just a smile. Good. Simple. Ryan appreciated simple. Guests took their seats. Conversations quieted. Music began. The ceremony was starting. Ryan took his place. Then immediately spotted several friends staring at him expectantly. Chris pointed at his own eyes. A warning. No crying. Ryan rolled his eyes. Chris appeared pleased with himself. The wedding party entered. Everything went smoothly. Suspiciously smoothly. Almost too smoothly. That should have been a warning. Then it was time for Princess Susan. The puppy trotted proudly down the aisle. The tiny floral collar bounced with each step. Guests smiled. Family members laughed softly. Everything was perfect. For approximately 10 seconds. Then someone dropped a cracker. Ryan saw it happen. So did Susan. So did the puppy. The puppy changed direction instantly. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Princess Susan acquired the cracker. Victory was achieved. Then she proudly resumed her journey down the aisle as if nothing unusual had occurred. The venue erupted in laughter. Ryan bent forward. Susan's mother covered her face. Even the officiant was laughing. The puppy reached the front looking extremely pleased with herself. Chris whispered, "That's her wedding now." Ryan couldn't even argue. Then the doors opened. And everything else disappeared. Susan stood there. Beautiful, obviously. But that wasn't what hit him. It was the smile. The same smile she'd given him 3 years ago. The same smile she'd given him at the pool table. The same smile she'd given him when he'd handed her a puppy named after herself. She looked happy. Completely happy. And suddenly Ryan understood why people got emotional during weddings. Because sometimes a moment arrives and you realize you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Susan walked toward him. Ryan felt his throat tighten. From somewhere behind him, he heard Chris quietly say, "Told you." More betting money changed hands. By the time Susan reached him, both of them were smiling so much their faces hurt. "Hi," she whispered. Ryan laughed. "Hi. You survived." "Barely." She glanced toward the puppy. "That's fair." The officiant smiled knowingly. The ceremony continued. Words were spoken. Promises were made. But what Ryan remembered most wasn't any single sentence. It was the feeling, the certainty, the comfort, the complete absence of doubt. He'd known she was his person long before this day. Today simply gave them a chance to say it out loud. Then came the vows. Susan spoke first. Her voice shook slightly. Not from nervousness, from emotion. Ryan listened. Every word landed. Every promise felt real. Because she'd already been living them. When his turn came, he didn't try to be poetic. That wasn't who he was. Instead, he told the truth. About choosing each other. About partnership. About being on the same team. Susan's eyes filled with tears. His did too. Several rows back, Chris silently celebrated another correct prediction. Finally, the officiant looked at them both. The moment had arrived. Ryan squeezed Susan's hands. Susan squeezed back. The officiant smiled. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The cheers started before the sentence was finished. Ryan kissed his wife. A simple kiss. A happy kiss. A kiss that felt like coming home. The room erupted. Family cheered. Friends applauded. The puppy barked. Twice. Apparently she wanted to contribute. The reception that followed was exactly what both of them had hoped for. Good food. Good company. Laughter everywhere. No unnecessary drama. Just people celebrating. At one point Princess Susan somehow ended up on the dance floor. Nobody knew how. Nobody knew why. But she became the center of attention again. Ryan wasn't surprised. Susan wasn't surprised. The puppy wasn't surprised. Only the guests seemed confused. Late that evening, as the reception wound down, Ryan and Susan slipped outside. Just for a minute. Just to breathe. The night air was cool. The venue lights glowed behind them. Inside, their friends and family continued celebrating. Susan leaned against him. "Wife." Ryan smiled. "That's new. Husband. I like that one." She laughed softly. For a few moments they simply stood together, looking out into the darkness, listening to the distant sounds of celebration. The future stretched ahead. Not perfect. Not predictable. But theirs. Susan slipped her hand into his. Ryan squeezed gently. The same way he always did. The same way he always would. And together they headed back inside. Back to their friends. Back to their family. Back to the life they'd chosen. Back to the happily ever after that looked remarkably like ordinary life. Which, for both of them, was exactly what they wanted. Epilogue. 1 year later, the first anniversary arrived on a Thursday. Neither Ryan nor Susan realized it until Chris texted them. "Congratulations on surviving each other." Ryan looked up from his computer. Susan glanced over from her desk. The second desk. The one they'd installed before she moved in. The one that had quietly proven they had been right about living together all along. "What day is it?" Susan asked. Ryan checked his phone, then laughed. Oh, her eyes widened. Oh. They looked at each other, then simultaneously spoke. Happy anniversary. The fact that they'd forgotten for most of the morning only made them laugh harder. Married life turned out to be exactly what they'd expected, which was probably the highest compliment either of them could have given it. Nothing had fundamentally changed, and everything had. Susan still stole bites off Ryan's plate. Ryan still made blunt compliments that made her blush. They still spent evenings together on the couch. Still sent each other ridiculous texts while sitting 10 feet apart. Still chose each other every day. The biggest difference was that there was no more planning, no more countdown, no more waiting for the next stage. They were living it. This was it. The future they'd spent years discussing had become the present. And honestly, it was wonderful. The house felt different too. Fuller, livelier, partially because Susan lived there now. Mostly because Princess Susan had grown up. Sort of. Physically, the golden retriever was fully grown. Mentally, she remained committed to bad decisions. She had stolen 3 oven mitts, 5 socks, a hamburger bun, and an amount of attention that should have been mathematically impossible. Ryan was convinced half their neighborhood knew the dog better than they knew him. He wasn't wrong. During evening walks, people regularly called out, "Hi, Princess Susan." Meanwhile, Ryan received, "Oh, and hello, Ryan." Susan found this endlessly entertaining. Ryan claimed it didn't bother him. Nobody believed him. A year of marriage also meant a year of merged traditions. Holidays had been divided, then recombined. Family visits became easier. Schedules became smoother. The house was nearly always occupied by friends, sometimes intentionally, sometimes not. Several members of their friend group had apparently decided Ryan's backyard was public property. One Saturday afternoon, Ryan walked outside to find Chris sitting on a patio chair, alone, drinking lemonade. Ryan stared. Chris stared back. Finally, Ryan asked, "How did you get in?" "The gate." "Why are you here?" Chris thought for a moment. Excellent question. Ryan accepted that answer because experience had taught him it wasn't worth pursuing further. The neighborhood had become home for Susan too. On warm evenings, families gathered outside. Children rode bikes. Dogs barked. People talked between driveways. It was exactly what Ryan had loved when he first bought the house. Now he shared it with his wife. The thought still made him smile sometimes. Not because it was new, because it was real. On the evening of their anniversary, they didn't go to an expensive restaurant. Neither wanted to. They ordered takeout, changed into comfortable clothes, and spent the evening exactly where they wanted to be. At home. The puppy dog technically was stretched across the couch between them, occupying far more space than her size justified. Susan rested her head against Ryan's shoulder. The television played quietly in the background. Neither was paying attention. 1 year. Ryan nodded. 1 year. Susan smiled. "Still happy I challenged you?" Ryan laughed. "You mean when you held my proposal hostage?" Her gasp was entirely fake. "That's not what happened." "It absolutely is. I simply established conditions. You negotiated a marriage contract." "I did." Ryan squeezed her hand. "No regrets." Her smile softened. "Me neither." The room settled into comfortable silence. Princess Susan snored. Not softly, not delicately, like a freight train with confidence issues. Susan laughed. Ryan laughed too. Then they both looked down at the dog. Their dog. The surprise that had started everything. The furry troublemaker who had somehow become part of every important memory. Princess Susan twitched in her sleep and rolled onto her back, demanding belly rubs while unconscious. Ryan didn't know how that was possible. Susan immediately started petting her. Ryan shook his head. "She's spoiled." Susan looked up. "No." Ryan raised an eyebrow. Susan thought for a moment, then smiled. "Okay, maybe a little." Ryan laughed. The dog sighed happily. The evening stretched ahead of them. Ordinary, peaceful, comfortable. Exactly the kind of life they'd always wanted. And as Ryan sat there with his wife beside him and his ridiculous dog sprawled across their couch, he found himself thinking something he'd thought many times over the past year. Not that life was perfect. Not that everything went according to plan. Just that the world felt right. And in the end, that was better. Much better.